Yo, what's going on? Not here, and we're back with a final gold tips video for you to keep an eye on for making fat stacks upon launch and the very early days of the expansion. We've got a spicy vendor flip that will leave hunters feeling exploited, as usual, an easy long-term investment so you can get paid for giving raiders a pearl necklace, and more. So let's get started, Goblinos. Let's start with the pearl necklace giving, because I know y'all want to know what that degeneracy is about. You see the endless amounts of Naga you're going to slay in Zangarmarsh and the Coilfang dungeons? Well, they often give you their clams, and these clams can contain Jagal pearls, which have minimal demand outside of a 7 skill leveling stretch for jewel crafting in the early days. They also contain shadow pearls, which we're interested in too, but the early price on these will be less bargain basement level because they're a good way to go from 350 to 365 jewel crafting. As you can see, Jagal pearls are literally vendor price almost on auction house on private servers till a 500% spike. Likewise, shadow pearls see a significant but lower spike of 280% ish at the same juncture in time. Of course, at this stage you're saying yeah, pearls, we get it, what's the reason? Necklace of the Deep. I told you were going to give some raiders some pearl necklaces. This neck is a blue, but by Illidan is it a good blue. The spike is because on private servers this launches alongside Black Temple or Phase 3 in TBC Classic terms, though it does appear that this will be in TBC Classic immediately on launch, which makes the payoff pretty fast potentially once people clock on, but there's definitely greater scope once Phase 3 hits. Let me explain. This isn't just an ordinary blue, this is Feral Tank juice to the max. It's pretty competitive in phases 1 and 2, though not the best option, but since agility scales to the moon for avoidance, and in tier 6 especially, Feral Tanks are going to want to be more heavy on avoidance for certain bosses, it ascends to the very best option for the likely gearing style that tanks will adopt, Feral Tanks that is, in phase 3. It does decrease in value again in Somewhere Plateau because there's some context that reduces the value of agility on the defensive side of the game a little bit, but the point remains. This is a long-term competitive item that has a whole phase as actual BIS. Now, Feral isn't the only spec that wants this. Some of you will already have in your mind that survival is actually a spec that will be interested in this, and you're right. Survival hunters of the world have a pretty keen interest in a 37 agility neck, given the exposed weakness mechanic and the raid DPS implications. The demand will be broad once the next true value is common knowledge amongst those playing these specs, Feral in particular, particularly in phase 3 of course, so you could get rich from loading up then shooting those pearls. Next. Alright, so I promised you some more hunter exploitation, which you've already learned about in Gold Tips 2, but this one is maybe the spiciest little avenue I've come across in all my TBC deep diving. In Netherstorm, there is a vendor with a limited supply on several uncommon weapons, Dealer Jadian, over here at the Stormspire. In particular, we're interested in Void Talon, but to be honest with you, you could probably profit reasonably from all of these early on, because they're not too bad across the board, but juice boxes out on the Void Talon peeps. There's some spice. Adamantite weight stones provide both crit rating and the weapon damage to the ranged damage of a hunter. Hunters can only use fist weapons of the available weapon types that you can apply weight stones to. As such, for the most part, fist weapons are always near the top of the hunter stat stick weapons, if not absolute BIS. Particularly, Void Talon is one of the best fist weapon for the offhand in phase 1 for all hunters. Beastmaster hunters will prefer Storm Reaver Claws, while Survival will use Blade of the Unrequited as a relatively small upgrade over it since it's a dagger and not a fist weapon, but it's just that good essentially. But the exact BIS isn't really an issue when we're talking about those first few weeks, right? This fist weapon seriously slaps for hunters that are really keen to blast as they jump right into Heroics and Karazhan upon 70. It can reasonably last you all the way to phase 2, assuming you are melee weaving, which has some difficulties, and we saw in vanilla that it wasn't universally popular. In fact, it was quite a minority set of hunters that did it. And essentially, even if you were using this all the way through to phase 2, you'd have very little loss in performance compared to Storm Reaver Claws or Blade of the Unrequited, depending on your spec. And of course, limited supply means we can probably get more profit per purchase than we otherwise would, since it's not as simple to pick it up. Now, I will note that Blizzard have nerfed many limited supply recipes going into Classic. For example, we covered in Gold Tips 1, the original, that Transmute Primal Might recipe will be pretty hard to come by and therefore be a great vendor flip. But from that 4-hour timer at 3 vendors, they have turned it into a bind on pickup recipe with a constant supply. Blizzard are clearly not super keen on Goblino's gatekeeping high profile vendor items. However, in this case, I could see the limited supply easily sticking in some form or another, since at the end of the day, it's nowhere near as impactful as a 4-hour timer on the recipe for Primal Might would have been. Now, I can't show you any data to back this, since the fist weapon thing is essentially a beta discovery, brand new information that didn't matter on private servers because it didn't apply. But that also means the knowledge gap will be there, and hunters may panic purchase a quick and easy fist weapon, such as Void Talon, upon being told by their guildies or the hunter discord that fist weapons are legit. Either way you slice it, this is an easy pick, flip, repeat type item which has a pretty lucrative market, assuming Blizzard don't nerf the supply limit, and even with a nerf, it'd probably be pretty decent regardless. Pearl necklaces and fisting. Sounds like a good launch week, to be honest. Let's move on. This brings me to what is essentially a spicy herb that may become a pretty dominant consumable, specifically for firelocks and mages due to how powerful it is with Bloodlust especially. Notably though, it performs as a solid consumable from the on-hit proc alone, outside of the fire spell damage component, assuming you don't need to use dark runes as part of your in-fight consumes to perform. For example, it even procs for druids inside their forms, which is an extreme rarity as far as on-hit effects go. But of course, effects like Adrenaline Rush with Lust, Sword Spec procs, and Blade Flurry mean this consume procs a lot of that 40 damage over and over and over. It's not going to be essential for beating content, far from it, but it's almost certainly going to be a consume that gains prominence as the metagame becomes more known by the wider community. The issue, and the early gold potential, is that it's a pretty rare spawn only in Zanga Marsh in place of Ragvale nodes. So if you're farming this, farm Ragvale to try force a Flamecap spawn. It's not as rare as Black Lotus, but 30 minutes on the mostly dead beta realm picking up all the Ragvale spawns didn't yield me with any Flamecap spawns. So if you pick these up early, even for something like 10 gold, perhaps even higher in phase 1, it would not surprise me if it appreciates aggressively as the meta becomes more clear, similar to Winterfall Firewater did in vanilla, with all the warriors stacking and the wider community slowly growing into the less obvious but ultimately awesome consumes for blasting. Now inevitably, you're going to get a whole bunch of Ragvale if you're looking to farm flame caps. Whether you're the farmer or the guy at auction house buying suppressed Ragvale, there is perhaps some sneaky potential to use these in other farms or to sell to farmers in potion form. Let me introduce you to a not really talked about consume. Sneaking potion. See? Sneaky potential? Yeah, I know. This potion gives you 1 minute of additional stealth levels, equivalent to being 6 levels higher than you are. So if you're level 70 with no other boosts to stealth, you're prowling or stealthing as a level 76. This may be a good way to access more chests, mining herbs, herb nodes, and or gas clouds in instances such as Steam Vault, Mana Tombs, Orkney Crypts, Sethek Halls, just to name the ones that have clear potential for further abuse, as they're already being talked about as very good dungeon farms. One final thing, and it's not going to be super consistent because early blues are really inflated, but if you can find the Masters Treads for a relatively low price on auction house, there is real demand here for arena players, specifically rogues. As you may guess, ensuring you don't get knocked out of stealth and or getting the enemy rogue out of stealth before they find you is pretty huge. Given the fast nature of Season 1 especially, these boots are very impactful thanks to the increased stealth level passive breaking parity on stealth detection. These boots plus the Knight's Eye Panther figurine will be the meta for Season 1 rogues, of which there will be many. So go and abuse that if you like. That's about it though, Goblinos, DGens, friends. I will see you next time, hopefully in your notifications.